much, Thomas. Just a quick few comments in regard to Brexit. I think it's slightly ironic that the British Prime Minister entitled his letter "A Fair and Reasonable Compromise." UK proposes for a new protocol in Ireland, Northern Ireland. In my view, what the British government is now putting forward is neither fair nor reasonable, nor even a compromise. I think it's a considerable reneging on the commitments made by Britain and agreed with the European Union in the 2017 joint report. And if we just go to paragraph 49 of that report, the UK, and I quote, "The UK remains committed to protecting North-South cooperation and to its guarantee of avoiding a hard border. Any future arrangements must be compatible with these overarching requirements. In the absence of agreed solutions, the United Kingdom will maintain full alignment with those rules of the internal market and the customs union, which now or in the future support North-South cooperation, the all-island economy and the protection of the 1998 agreement." More and more people, I believe, particularly in the communities, in the border communities, in the community where I live, just fear that a hard crash-out Brexit may now be just less than 4 weeks away. And there's a great fear, as you're very well aware, Tánaiste, of that happening. Of course, in regard to the Prime Minister's proposals, the only political party in Northern Ireland, as we know, supporting those proposals is the Democratic Unionist Party. And along with political parties in Northern Ireland, I think we have to be very cognizant as well of the views of representative organisations who have voiced their strong opposition. And they include Manufacturing Northern Ireland, Retail Northern Ireland, Northern Ireland Retail Consortium. And I believe that what's proposed at present will damage the Northern Ireland economy and also damage 2 decades plus of painstaking political and cross-community progress made under the Good Friday Agreement. And what damages the Northern Ireland economy damages our economy as well, because thankfully today both our economies are so interdependent because of the very valuable development in the all-Ireland economy and the growth of business on an all-Ireland basis as well. And if we think of the very stark remarks of Manufacturing Northern Ireland, and they said last night, frankly, the proposal is worse than no deal for Northern Ireland businesses. Indeed, I gather from some of the limited commentary I listened to at the Tory party conference that some of their British ministers saw Brexit as an opportunity for widespread divergence between Britain and the European Union in terms of standards and conditions. Well, hopefully that won't happen. But if such divergence emerged, then communities such as the ones I represent would be very adversely affected and would result in a very clear breach of the Good Friday Agreement. And I think one comment that we must be very mindful of, and hopefully it will be brought through right at the end of the negotiations, and that was President Juncker's statement in the European Parliament last April, when he stated, "The UK must fully respect the letter and spirit of the Good Friday Agreement." President Juncker's stress, I believe, on both the letter and the spirit of the Good Friday Agreement is hugely important and significant, and I sincerely hope that there will be no deviation in that position, that EU solidarity with the government position, indeed with the position of the Oireachtas here, that will be maintained. I said here at Tánaiste, I think it was the first committee meeting we had after that referendum in June 2016. I said, for a person who grew up in the Troubles, who lived in the border communities, has had the privilege of representing 2 counties with a long land border, the psychology of going back to borders, the borders being part of our everyday narrative, it's terribly damaging, and we sincerely hope that that doesn't emerge. And I wish you well in the continued difficult task that you have had in ensuring that Ireland's interests are fully protected. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. I'm going to just say I agree with every word you just said, and because of that, and I'm very familiar with paragraph 49 of the December 2017 agreement. I quote it all the time to people. We worked really hard to get that agreed. Prime Minister May at the time, I think, understood the complexity of trying to protect the Good Friday Agreement and relationships on the island of Ireland at the same time as delivering Brexit. And gave that commitment because of that. And also paragraph 50, by the way, which is the next paragraph, to try to reassure unionism at that time. So what Prime Minister Johnson has proposed falls significantly short of that commitment. And that is why I've said, while I regard Prime Minister Johnson's proposal as a serious proposal and an effort to try to move negotiations forward, there still is a need for another big step to ensure that an outcome here that we can all sign up to, I hope, is consistent with that paragraph that you've just quoted, and also the commitments that have been made in the context of the backstop. If we're going to replace the backstop with something else, it has to do the same job, which is to reassure border communities that they're not going to face border infrastructure and the disruption of that in the future. And it's got to also ensure that, you know, mechanisms that are in place in Northern Ireland to try to mitigate against the damage of Brexit are not obstructed by a minority against the majority will. That wouldn't be democratic, and it wouldn't be consistent with the Good Friday Agreement either. So the challenge for us is to try to find a way forward that unionists and nationalists and members of communities that are neither can support. But ultimately, we've got to make sure that we aren't going back to a border on the island of Ireland being a political debating point again, and all that flows from that in terms of the corrosive impact on relationships that flows from that, and the disruption to trade, which has been such a reinforcer of normality and peace, as you know, in the border region for the last 2 decades. So this is difficult stuff, but we want to work with the British Prime Minister. Of course, we're working as part of Michel Barnier's team, and we will do everything we can to try to get a deal in the next week or so. But it's got to be the right deal, so that we don't let people down and find that the border becomes the topic of debate in Ireland for the foreseeable future, with all of the divisions that flow from that and the calls for more radical change and so on in Northern Ireland, which I don't believe, and I think you're the same, I don't believe we're ready for. So these are difficult times. We're writing history at the moment for what the relationship between Britain and Ireland and the EU and the UK will look like for the next 20 years, and we need to get it right.
Thank you, Taoiseach.